Well, I want to welcome you here. I want to say hello to everyone watching online and everybody at our jail campus, everybody here. We had an incredible week last weekend. It was so fun to be a part of. We saw 12 baptisms, 19 professions, and each of the last 2 years, we got to see over 120 people profess Christ on this stage together. And my favorite part is not the numbers, it's each person and their story and getting to read that. I love seeing such a diverse group of people, old and young, different backgrounds, different educations, different political perspectives being drawn together by our mutual love for Jesus. And I think that's special. That's something that really is so meaningful. It's cool to watch God work in our community. And I just want to remind you, we're not praying for revivals. We're living in the middle of a revival. I hope that we don't take that for granted. I hope that we're thanking God regularly, that we get to see a community, a people, marriages, individuals changed because of Jesus together. We're in the second week of our Relentless series, and I'm excited about this. Relentless is our word for the year as a church. I hope that you were encouraged by last week's message. I was. If you missed it, check that out. Grant, did you select a word for this year? You haven't yet, but you got to. Don't forget. Yeah. Or you're fired. No, just kidding, you're not. We love you. That'd be terrible. He's like the best ever. He's worked here for twice as long as I have almost. So anyway, last week, a special week. If you haven't picked a word, I want to challenge you to pick that word. And we're also in the process of casting vision and unifying hearts and raising funds to build our Hebron building, which I'm so excited about. The more we talk about this, the more I meet with you guys, the more I'm like, man, this is right. This is so cool. And this week, I hope you're excited to be at church. I think for some of you who need this could be a defining spiritual message of your life. Many of you, I think, are going to look back at October 27th, 2019, and say, that's Pastor John's mom's birthday. And others of you are going to look back and say, this is a moving spiritual moment for me. This was a day that God took our faith to a whole new level. I know, I love doing random things like that, and then I'm like, but why did you say that, John? That was not the time to say that. That's not what they expected. Anyway, I want to start out with a quick story. As many of you know, my wife and I moved here from Minnesota 5 years ago with my parents. Now, Asian people, when they get old, they move in with their kids. They co-own houses together. That's just what we do. I know it's weird, but it's what we do, okay? Don't judge me. Anyway, so we left this house that we both lived in Minnesota that was awesome. And it was hard to leave. I loved it. It was on the Mississippi River, and it had this unbelievable, you'd open the front doors, and all you could see through the picture windows was this giant, majestic river flowing in front. It was all natural. On the other side of the river is just woods and trees, and, it had ton of bald eagles. It was like a bald eagle haven. At one time, I saw 13 or 14 bald eagles sitting in front of our house like one winter. It was pretty crazy, super cool. You crawl in their nests, and you would see all these like dog collars and cat collars in their true story. I mean, it was like ferocious. Watch out for your Chihuahua or Chihuahua, right? So it was pretty crazy. It was picturesque. It was amazing. My wife's favorite feature of that house was an apple tree. She loved this apple tree because it cross-pollinated with the neighbor's trees, and it was like super abundant, like thousands of apples every single fall. And they were of a specific breed called Honeycrisp. And if you haven't had a Honeycrisp apple, it was like super, super good. And we loved like making pies and canning and drying them out and whatever. It's a ton of fun. And leaving that place was hard. It was really hard. And she had lived in that town almost her whole life. So moving her out was super hard. And she'd only really been out of the state of Minnesota like a few times. And I was moving her like across the country, totally different landscape, different culture, different everything. We prayed a lot about it. And we decided it was going to be the best choice for us. So we decided to move. And her one request, she said, John, when we get another house, can we get a house with an apple tree? Like, I want an apple tree. Apple tree feels like home to me. And we actually bought the house we live in before we'd ever seen it. Our real estate agent said, hey, it's been on the market for 577 days. It's like a super, super steal of a deal, And so we didn't pay very much for the house. And then when we got it, we're like, this is why, though. You know what I mean? Because it looked like Mike Tyson's crack den. You know what I mean? And it's a duplex. It houses like two families. It was perfect for us. And today we thank God. Like today, it's like perfect for us. It's like a gift from God. But at the time, Kristen saw it, true story, and immediately cried. She's like, I can't live here. This is ridiculous, right? And she's like, will you give me an apple tree? I miss home. And I was like, baby girl, I promise I'm going to take care of you. Being the loving husband I was, I explained to her, I said, girl, you know a promise is a promise. I'm going to keep my word. I'm going to get you an apple tree. So here's the thing, though, honey. I never told you when I was going to get the apple tree. And I got like a million other things to do than deal with your emotions right now, my promises to you, whatever. So I'm going to get you that apple tree. But it's going to take like 3 to 4 years anyway to get an apple tree or have an apple tree grow old enough to produce fruit. So don't worry about it. Even if I get it this fall, what's the difference? Tomato, right? So 3 to 4 years later, my wife was like, hey, remember when you said that it takes that long for an apple tree to produce a harvest? I was like, yeah, I do. She's like, we'd be harvesting our first fruit this fall. And I was like, got me, right? You got me. So I was afraid for my life. And I immediately went online and I ordered 3 apple trees, which are like super expensive. I basically ordered like 1.5 pairs of chopsticks. Like they were little twigs that showed up for like $120. I was like, this is larceny for these little, and I thought they was gonna come in like a pot. You know what I mean? Like that's what a tree comes in, is a pot. No, they came in a box, like a little skinny box. You know, I didn't know what the box was. I said, this ain't for me. So I left it on the counter for a few days, which probably didn't help things, you know, but I opened it up. I don't know how to garden or nothing. So I just plant the trees in the ground. And they haven't died, but they have not grown at all. And so 1.5 years later, I walked out yesterday in the rain to take this picture for you guys. These are my apple trees right here, right? And it's been 1.5 years now they've been in the ground. They're not doing too good. They're not doing too good. Not good at all. Now, I have read about this. It turns out when you uproot a tree, it is 70 to 90% of its root system is lost. It's gone. And what's amazing to me is the top part of the tree looks the same, but this big bottom part of the tree is gone. It's gone. It's gone. And for a lot of trees, when you move them, it's like traumatic, and they won't grow for years. They'll just kind of subsist as they're reestablishing a root system. And up top, there's no growth. I mean, it's a big cost. It's a big cost. And you know what? A lot of trees will die when you move them. I would argue that the same is true for my family. We uprooted from Minnesota. And for our first year here, we were lonely. The landscape was so strange. The roads were crazy. I mean, where are the middle lines? How do you know where the middle is? Like, who does it? It's just paint, y'all. Like, come on. Like, I'll pay $1 more a year in property tax. Give me some paint. The road seems strange. We didn't have close relationships. There was a whole season where uprooting my family meant no growth. Like, we were just acclimating. We were just fighting for survival as a unit. You know what I mean? We were just adjusting. And it looked fine up top, but down below, we had no roots. That's my simple thought for the day. Like if you don't put down roots, you can't grow in the critical arenas of life, relationally, emotionally, and spiritually. I believe that people can physically move around pretty easily. It ain't that hard. But God designed us to put down roots. And in this mobile, technologically advanced society, globalized economy, all of our mobility has resulted in major collateral damage for all people in a variety of different levels that I think we don't value correctly when we're making decisions in life. And I'm not saying you can't ever uproot your family from any area. I just want us to learn to revalue and reevaluate the cost of doing so. Today, I want to challenge you to change your mindset, because I don't think life is something that we go through. Life is something that we put down roots in emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. And I think the most effective families, people, and organizations, the ones that leave lasting legacies, the ones that are admired most, are those that put down deep roots in the community, in their families, in their churches, like in their businesses. Those are the ones we admire. I started to notice a bit of an issue in this community. You know, I go places, and this whole community is like Cheers. Everybody knows your name. You know what I mean? Like everywhere you go, everybody knows the cars you drive. We're waving all the time. That's cool. You know, I love that. But a lot of people will come to me and say, Pastor, I go to your church. We go to your church. It's awesome. We love it. We love the messages. But I have learned that go to your church can mean a variety of different things, right? For some people, go means come all the time. That's great. Other people, go, in this particular circumstance, meant I went to your church a couple years ago for a couple months. And it's like, well, you don't really go to the church. So yeah, you know, we went for like all the time a couple years ago for a couple months. We've been back for like Christmas and Easter a few times. Then they say, but Pastor, you got to pray for us. And this is always, you got to pray for us. Marriage is falling apart, finances and kids, and we've got all these issues. Will you pray for us? Yeah, absolutely. And then I always ask, I say, what was the best season of your life? You know what they always say? Well, actually, it was when we were engaged with a local church. And that was the best season of our life. That was the best season. You know, that was the best time. It's like, we haven't been back, though, because we got sidetracked. You know, we got our feelings hurt and we took a break, or we got busy and just sort of lost track. A sports season came up. We got busy remodeling. We decided to flip a house. We had work issues. We had this issue and blah, 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 and we just moved away. And we got to get back into it. I hear different versions of this all the time. And I'm beginning to realize there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how church works. And here's really my one main thought today. Church is not a place that we go. It is a house that we plant ourselves in, relationally, emotionally, and spiritually. I got a key passage today that talks about this. Paul writes it to the church in Ephesus. And everybody loves the second part of this passage. Our passage is Ephesians 3, starting at verse 14, going through verse 19. Everybody loves Ephesians 3, 18 and 19. It's on coffee cups. It's everywhere. Because Paul is talking about the secret next level faith that you can have in your life. Everybody loves talking about having that faith. Nobody likes talking about how to get that faith. That's the first part. Let's start with the second part. He says in verse 18, and may you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep his love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you'll be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. I mean, this last part right here, I don't care if you're an atheist, you want that. Like, you want that. Who doesn't want the fullness of life and power that comes from God? Have you ever met somebody that actually has that? I mean, everybody claims to be a Christian. Not everybody. A lot of people claim to be Christian. But have you ever met somebody who, like, is a Christian? You know what I mean? They have the fullness of life and power that comes from God. They're radiant. There's this inner light, and you see them, and it's like, what do they have? Like, what do they have? Well, they have the fullness of life and power that comes from God. We put that on our coffee cups like, I want that. I want to think I have that. Maybe if I just believe hard enough, I'll get it. Right? Paul actually talks about how to get it. It's kind of interesting here in Ephesians 3:14. He says, when I think of all this is just preceding. This is verses just before. Everybody loves excluding that. This is where the work comes in. He goes, when I think of all this, I fall to my knees and pray to the Father, the creator of everything in heaven and on earth. I pray that from his glorious and limited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through his Spirit. And this first part right here, such a great reminder. Kristen did such a good job talking about prayer. Like, if you want God to move in your life, it begins with prayer. I think so many of us are like, well, if I say the right thing and read the right book and do the right stuff, I'm not saying don't do that. But like, God elects who he will. Like, if you want God to reach your family, your community, your friends, if you want God to move in Hebron, we want God to move in Hebron. It begins with prayer. Like, God, will your grace, will you unload your grace in this area on this person? Please save my husband, right? I mean, it begins with prayer. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that. I think a lot of times we think we have more control over this. But no. We beg God to begin his move. And then he says, Christ will make his home in your hearts as you trust in him. And not everybody, but a lot of people have heard that being a Christian begins with asking Jesus into your heart as your leader and forgiver. Right? That's where Christianity begins. You make him the leader of your life, the forgiver of your life. You follow him in all his ways. That's where Christianity begins. And this is where a lot of people's cognition of experiencing the fullness of life and power that comes from following Jesus, this is where their cognition ends. And yet there's another step. Right here, he says, then your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. See, this is the key. It's roots growing down deep into the house of God. And Paul's words here are very specific. These words that he's using, he is referencing several different passages, but specifically Psalms 92, starting at verse 12. It says, but the godly will flourish like palm trees and grow strong like the cedars of Lebanon, for they have been transplanted, planted, or rooted, another translation says, to the Lord's own house. They flourish in the courts of our God. Throughout the Bible, whenever it's referencing somebody's spiritual maturity, it's always trees planted in God's house. And here's my simple question. Are you planted in God's house, or are you going to God's house? There's a big difference between those two questions. And I think a lot of us miss out on the very best part of God's presence in our life. I think a lot of us miss out on the power and the fullness of God's presence in our life, as Ephesians 3:19 talks about, because we're not planted in the house of God. Throughout the Bible, the description of spiritual maturity is pretty much uniform. God almost describes it as being planted, being rooted and unified at the cross. Church is not a place that we go to. It is a house that we plant ourselves in, relationally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I'm here to tell you today, I want you to stop going to church. Don't say, I go to that church, I love that church, I love your church. Start saying, I'm rooted in my church. I'm established in Christ. I'm planted in his house, in his family. See, I believe even if you're not a Christian, all of us today, in our culture today, dramatically undervalue what comes from being rooted and planted in a community. What I want to do in this message, I want to talk about 4 specific areas we undervalue being planted. And then I want to talk about 2 or 3 specific ways we can tell that somebody is, in fact, planted. But let's start off by talking about 4 areas we undervalue being rooted and planted. The first area is friendships. It's just crazy to me how quick my generation is to get in a fight, pack up our toys, and go home. You know what I mean? It's like, what, really? You're going to, and this is what we do. We say, well, I don't like them. I'm just going to go get friends elsewhere. You know, I got Facebook. I got, 1,500 friends. And what we do is we uproot our tree, and we go over here and we dig a new hole, and we think, no big deal, no cost. The tree looks the exact same. Yeah, up top it does, but you just cut off 70 to 90% of your roots. I think so many people go through life, and you look like my little dinky apple trees, right? You never really establish yourself because you're moving from place to place to place, friend to friend to friend. It's crazy to me when I do funerals for older people who have lived good lives. Just really different. All these people are like, yeah, we've been friends since we were born. Our parents were friends with each other. Our grandparents were friends. And you just see these relationships that have transcended ages, wars, like experiences, divorces, tragedies, all this stuff. And there's these friendships that have transcended all of that. And there's just this level of community, completion, connection that is so different than what younger generations experience. Most of the men in my generation have zero close friends. Zero. Do you know how many people I counsel and talk to in my office, and they're all like, yeah, we don't have any friends. And listen, all the time it's like, yeah, because it's all, nobody, I have horrible friends. They're just not there. They're flaky, and I can't depend on them, and they're not there for me. No. You are a reflection of your 5 closest friends, right? And if your friends are not there for you and not dependable, I would argue that you're probably not there for them and not very dependable, right? I mean, that's the issue. That's what we do, because so many of us are so quick to uproot ourselves and say unfriend, block, and ghost, right? I think we undervalue the cost of not being rooted in friendships. Despite being the richest, most successful generation in human history, I think so many of us feel unfulfilled, depressed, anxious, and lonely because we fail to put down roots emotionally, spiritually, and relationally in this critical arena of life. Second area I think we undervalue being rooted and planted is at work. Changing jobs is the number one way to get a great raise. And a lot of you guys are like, that's awesome, I'm changing jobs. But listen, life satisfaction technically does not increase once you make more than $75,000 a year for most people. That's really interesting, because I think a lot of us are like, whoa, I'm going to switch jobs. I'm going to make a little bit more money, and I get a new truck, which becomes the old truck the day after you get it, right? Isn't that funny how that happens? I'm going to get a new truck, and I want new countertops to replace the old countertops that look just like the new countertops because I want new countertops and a new appliance and new this, and new boat, new that, new. And listen. I'm not saying all that's bad, but when you leave your work community, and you know what's interesting is men are so much less happy today than they were many years ago, and there's a number of different reasons for that. Society, culturally, the way men are viewed, all these different things. But I think one of the big reasons is we're not establishing really great relationships as men where we spend the most of our time. And I'm not saying it's bad to switch jobs. I'm not saying you can't switch jobs. I just think that when we move our family at great cost to our entire family, relationally, emotionally, and spiritually, to get a raise that isn't really going to be that meaningful for us, is it really worth it? Right? I just really want us to change the way that we quantify the value proposition of uprooting ourselves. So I think for a lot of us, there's struggle there. Another way that I think we undervalue being rooted and planted is relationships. This is a big deal. Big deal. My generation is like, well, we're just Tindering. It's fun for now. It's good. It's complicated. And I think that that's rough. I think that it's fun for now really robs you of the joy of a lifetime together. And let me tell you, when you're rooted with somebody for a lifetime, sometimes there are some diseases you got to weather. There's some tough things you got to go through. But I think in relationships romantically, we shouldn't just have a passing through transient mentality. I think we should have a do we want to plant here mentality. If we're married, I think a lot of us just have a it's okay if this ends mentality, but I think we underestimate the cost of divorce all the time, right? I mean, it's literally uprooting the plant of your life, ripping it in half, planting it somewhere else, recovering for a little while, and then for many people, after a few short years of recovery, right when you're starting to get established, pulling it up again, grafting it onto another tree that's been ripped in half, and replanting it a third time, right? As you remarry. Almost nobody says, you know what, Pastor? Divorce was just so much less costly relationally, emotionally, and spiritually, and financially than I thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? It was just no big deal. I really, really overestimated how traumatic that was going to be. No. And I'm speaking with compassion for many of you who've been through it. I know you have. This is a church that we love all. Everybody's welcome. We all got our issues. But I know if you've been through divorce, you're like, yeah, that was terrible, right? This is why God says he doesn't like it, because he loves you. And he knows the cost to your life. And he says, look, there are circumstances where, okay, it can happen, but I want you to know if you do it, it's going to be costly. It's going to hurt you. It's especially going to hurt your kids, probably far more. Really, really think about it. And this is why God calls us to put down roots for that reason. Finally, I think the fourth area that many of us undervalue being rooted is church. It's church. I think God made us to root ourselves in his church. And there are no perfect churches. You know what everybody loves here? Is when I say, welcome to First Church. No one's perfect, and everyone's welcome. Everybody's like, Pastor, I love that you say that. It made me feel so welcome here. It's such a great phrase. The problem with that is there's a lot of imperfect people here. You know what I mean? And you probably met some of them. It's like, man, you should have seen that guy give me the finger while he was driving by me with his 3 rings on the back of his car. You know, like, I can't believe. Can you believe that guy goes to church? Can you believe? I can't believe it. You should see the things that she says on Demont Unofficial and in Hebrew chatter and blah, blah. And listen, stop. If you love coming here just as you are, that means there's going to be other imperfect people here as well, including me. Like, some of you met me and you're like, I thought he glowed in the dark, but that guy's a jerk, right? I don't try to be a jerk. I think I'm a nice guy, but I have bad days just like anybody else. And I see people who leave church for silly reasons. Silly. Like, I got my feelings hurt. He didn't say hi to me. I didn't get a call back. I'm not getting fed. That means a lot of different things. But listen, I'm not saying you can't ever leave a church. I just think uprooting yourself for these reasons is something to really think about because the cost is high. Getting planted and healthy in a new place is not something that happens overnight. It takes time, it takes energy, and there will be a whole season of life as you're reestablishing your roots where you're not going to grow. And you might even shrink. You might even get less healthy. I'm not saying never leave, but count the cost. And I want to be clear here. I have no intention of leaving this church. I hope I get to finish out my career here. But listen, pastors come and go. Staff comes and goes. Being planted in a church for a lifetime, generation after generation, has real benefits. And my hope and prayer is you don't come here because you're like, Pastor, I love your messages. I hope you come here because you love Jesus and you love the Kingdom Great Commission effort that you're embarking on with this community of people together. That's why you connect to a church. And I hope that you'll love and help execute the vision of the next pastor as much as you do for me, right? I think this transplanting mentality has become a growing issue in our society. 2019 is full of people who love keeping our options open. We love not committing. It keeps us from putting down roots, and people are marrying later and having kids later and switching jobs way more often and moving far more often. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad. There's upsides to all of those things. I just don't think we value the downsides well enough correctly in each of those propositions. And if you do it, I want you to really think, I'm going to be uprooting. And there's a big cost to that. 4 different areas we undervalue not being rooted or uprooting ourselves. The second thing I want to talk about today is 3 signs of being planted. And I know a lot of you are like, that's a 7-point message. I promise. I'll get you out of here almost on time. This is not, we're not in Africa. We're in America, so I get it. 1 hour, that's all I get. But listen, the first sign of being planted is you're there in person for years. Now, being there in person used to be the only way to be somewhere, right? But now, because of the internet, you can be lots of places that you aren't. You know what I mean? Like shopping, socializing, church, gaming, Fortnite, hello. It's psychologically and sociologically a really poor substitute for real relationships that happen face to face. I'm not saying don't ever shop online. It's not a problem. But it's not a replacement of real face-to-face relationships. It's just not. The more research that's done, the more we recognize the deep cost to our soul of not being places in person. If you're watching online, love you. Glad that you're joining us online. I'd ask you, if you're skipping church like 10 times or more per year to watch online, you're missing out on something that is really healthy for you. And if you watch online regularly and you don't go to this church, find a church near you. You know what I mean? Find a church you can connect with, because I think there's real health to being places in person. For example, a few years ago, I had a real friend of mine, like a real face-to-face friend of mine, flapping his mouth about me online, just saying all kind of things on Facebook, right? And I was like, what is he doing? I know where he lives. I know who he is. We're friends, right? I thought we were friends. So, I just showed up to his house, and I knocked on his door, and I said, say it to my face. Say it to my face, all right? You're going to step up. No, I didn't do that. I'm kidding. You guys are like, wow, he's crazy, No, I didn't do that. I knocked on his door. I gave him a big hug. I said, hey, look, man, will you forgive me for the ways that I've hurt you? Obviously, I've hurt you in a lot of different ways. And, he admittedly I saw his countenance change, and he said, I'm so sorry. I just forgot that you were a person. Behind my keyboard, I just went nuts. I forgot that you were a real person who's doing the best you can. Blah, will you forgive me? It's just interesting, because when we're rooted in person with other people, something real happens with human compassion. And I believe that my generation in particular is missing out on this. This is why we see all this vitriol. Right? We see all this anger and polarization from people who are a little bit younger because we don't actually know people. We don't actually have relationships with people. We're just transplanted everywhere, and the trees of all of our relationships are kind of sickly because we never actually put down roots anywhere. So we don't mind hurting people because people to us are not significant. Another area that I think is hurtful regarding being there in person for years is inconsistency. I think the problem for a lot of us is there's a lot of opportunity to uproot our family for seasons. Seasons of sports, seasons of football, seasons of band, seasons of theater, seasons of cabin, seasons of whatever, right? And I'm not trying to single people out. I think for a lot of us, we say it's just a season, right? It's just a little season. We're going to uproot our family for these 10 weeks, right? And what we do is we just pop a tree out of the ground and we move it to a different field and then we pop it into the ground for 10 weeks, right? And then 10 weeks later, we pop it back out and we put it back in the same hole it was in. And we're like, see, it's the same. There's no difference here. Can you imagine if I did that with my apple trees? If just every single year in the fall, I just popped them right out of the ground, and then I just popped them in the ground over here, and then I took them back out of the ground, and I popped them back over here. That ain't going to be healthy for the apple trees. It looked the same on the surface, right? To everybody else, it's like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's up. But listen, you're cutting off your roots, 70 to 90% of your roots. And even though it looks the same and feels the same on the outside, on the inside, there's an issue there. I think this is why so many people feel a little disconnected from God, a little disconnected from the church. And look at their kids, and their kids have no connection. It's like you grew up in church, you love God so much, right? And then you raise your kids in church, and now they're growing up, and it's like, why don't they really love God that much? Well, because you popped them out of the ground all the time and put them somewhere else. They don't have roots. They don't have roots. Being rooted matters consistently. Being rooted anywhere, but church in particular, means you're there in person consistently for years. Making profession, becoming an owner. It means even in bad times and in good times and inconvenient times, in times where there's other great opportunities, it means I'm putting down roots because I recognize the tangible benefits. Hey, look, I don't care if it's this church. I love this church. I think it's great. But look, put down roots at a church. Our church isn't for everyone. There are a lot of churches that do other things better than we do. We're good at doing what we do, but there are other churches who are good at doing what they do. If you're looking for a church that plays hymns and reaches a specific generation really well and has Sunday school and preaches one specific kind of message every single week, expository, verse by verse. I mean, we do that, but we don't do that every single week. This church might not be for you. I love many of the churches in our community, especially Grace Fellowship, but also Community CRC, First CRC, American. I want to challenge you not to hop and shop. You know, I mean, I think 6 weeks is a great time to figure out and scope out the churches in your community. Then make a decision. And don't go sporadically. Put down roots and get involved because there's real blessing in it. The first sign of being rooted is you show up in person. The second sign is you're growing. You're growing. If you're rooted, eventually you should be growing. And I think there's a big misunderstanding in church here. You know what? People love saying to me, this is like pastors, it's like nails on a chalkboard. They always say, I'm not getting fed. I'm not getting faster. I'm not getting fed, you know? And it's like, please, just kill me. I'm dying. Like, can't hear it. I'm not getting fed. And I think it's because there's a misunderstanding about who we are in Christ. The Bible does not call us animals coming to a feeding trough. It repeatedly describes us as trees planted in the house of God with strong roots. If you're not getting fed, I don't think always the best solution is to uproot that tree and find different soil somewhere. Sometimes, yes, the soil's toxic. You got to get out of there. But you know what? Most of the time, I think the solution, if you're not getting fed, is to dig deeper roots. You know what I mean? Like it's time to tap deeper into the soil. Maybe it's time to reach down and tap into the deep reservoir that's always been there. Fill out a get involved card. Drop it into an offering plate at the welcome desk. Tap into the deep, real living water of volunteering life. Reach out and get to know someone. Like, you know, I get our church is getting bigger. Sometimes it's like, I feel like I don't know anybody. You know what? There's a lot of other people who also feel that too. What if you said, hey, I'm John. I'm a person. So are you. How are you? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's talking. You know, we do this. Like, we can do this. And I know it's like, I'm 35, and my mom always did this for my teachers when I was a kid, and I don't know how to do this, but I'm just gonna try it, you know. Like, we can do it. That was 2001: A Space Odyssey, but hummed very poorly, okay? What's that movie? Be cultured. I think people place responsibility for growth on the pastor a lot, too. I'm not trying to shirk my responsibility, but that's not correct. I mean, maybe with a like brand new itty-bitty baby Christian, yes, like I do some of that. But a pastor's job is not to grow you. That's God's job. What a pastor does is prune. We prune. And some of you guys are like, Pastor, y'all doing a good job of that right now. Maybe too good. Y'all pruning me hard right now in this message. Yeah, that's the point, right? Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 3, 6 and 7. He says, I planted a seed in your heart. Apollo watered it. But who made it grow? God. It's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. What's important was that God makes the seed grow, which brings me to another thought. I said this already, but a church is not about a pastor. It's about God working in people's hearts. We don't come here because we love a pastor. Pastors come and go. And again, I don't plan on going anywhere, but I just want to emphasize that. Someday I will be gone, one way or the other. Different speakers come and speak, but when a family stays planted at a church, especially generation after generation, real, meaningful, transitional growth happens. Like, I think it's transformational growth happens. I'm not saying never leave a church with systematic chronic issues, but I do think we're apt to do it a little bit too quickly. And we miss out on the benefit, the joy that comes from faithfulness. Again, I'm not saying don't leave a church. I just think there's a cost to uprooting your family. Just like my apple trees, it results in a whole season of growth potential gone. God sometimes calls people away. He called my family and I away from our church in Minnesota, and that was a big choice. Like, guys, that was really hard. You know, when we first moved here, we left a really fruitful season of ministry where people were giving their lives to Christ all the time. We moved here. We didn't see anybody choose to follow Jesus pretty much for our first year here. It was terrible. It was hard. We were getting established, and I just felt like, man, was that the end? Like, no, it wasn't the end. It was just I was getting rooted in new soil. But that was a big cost to consider when we were moving. Being rooted means you show up in person regularly. It means after a season of transition, you're then growing. And the third and final sign of being rooted is you're eventually producing fruit. This really matters to me. I think this should matter to you. I think there's a lot of us, we're like running through life. We're not really doing anything. You know what I mean? Like, we got to get new countertops that we can replace in a few years, and new appliances that we can replace in a few years, a new truck, a new boat we can replace in a few years, and I'm keeping my kids from not dying, and I'm going on vacations, and then my kids move out. You know what's crazy to me is our kids move out. Like, we put a lot of stuff into our kids, but eventually, like, they're going to forget about your birthday and pretty much forget that you, like, that's just what happens. Like, they just grow up, they move away, like, it's a thing that happens. And if the world's not getting better, if we're not making an eternal impact, if Jesus' name is not being made known, if people's lives are not hearing the gospel through us, I would ask you, are you really rooted and established in the love of God at the local church? I think there's a lot of us missing out on the true calling for every Christian in our life. I think there's a lot of us who would say, my relationship with God is stagnant. And this is the pattern that I see. This is a big pattern, okay? I see this pattern right now in America. I see lots of people grew up in church, love God, right? A little bit of partying in college. Then you come back to church. And why? Because you have kids. You have these little kids. I want to get my kids in church. I want to get my kids involved in church. You get your kids involved in church, and you do everything. You're like, I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to serve. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to, be on a leadership team. I'm going to do this stuff. I'm going to help. I'm going to sacrifice. It's awesome. It's awesome. It's awesome. And then something happens. It's called high school, right? Late middle school, early high school. All these opportunities come. And this is what we say. Just a season. It's just a season. And we uproot our family and ourselves from church for a season. And we do all this stuff and forget the collateral damage to our kids' relationship with Jesus. I want to talk about us for a moment. We do the season, and then we come back to church, and we see this hole that used to be there where a big, strong, mighty tree grew. And our kids are now gone, and we put ourselves back in the hole. And here's the problem. You're in the same spot. You're with the same people, with the same surroundings. And you look the same up top, but underneath you feel so disconnected and empty, right? Because here's the problem. Even though you're in the same place, as the same tree that you were before you uprooted yourself, you no longer have any of the roots that were there that you worked so hard to cultivate and connect. And the problem now is you now have this big, strong, tall tree that is totally disconnected and not being fed. It feels worse. It feels more acute, and yet you have to go through the same process of connecting all those roots once more, once again in your life. And I think a lot of people at that point, that's where like faith kind of ends. Like you get to this place and it's like, I had that faith. I still do. I still believe, Pastor. I just don't go that. It just don't feel connected. It's just not what it was. Just the reasons and things and problems and stuff and whatever. And I'm still with you, Pastor. And blah, blah, blah. And listen. If you're in that situation, I want to challenge you to go through the process of rooting yourself once again. Like mistakes in the past aside, decisions in the past aside, like get rooted and say, I'm ready to lean in, to lead, to serve, to pursue, to invest, to give, and be relentless. If your children are not exhibiting the fruit of a love for Jesus, I want to ask you, are you making sure your family is rooted and established in the love of God? I know so many families that do so many good things, but at the end of the day, the tree of life in the next generation's heart is dying or dead because we're not planted in God's house. I want us to be planted and rooted. Being rooted means we show up in person regularly. It means we're growing, and it means we're producing fruit. Are you rooted? As we begin the possibility of considering closing right here, I still got a lot to say, but I need to end it because I'm out of time here. But the greatest families in our community, I want you to picture them in your mind right now. I want you to think about who are the greatest families in our community, and you all know who they are. Like, it's pretty easy. I don't need to say names. We just know. We know who they are. It's easy to think about. And listen. You know what the coolest part is the greatest families in this community almost have a one-to-one correlation between being the greatest family and being here for many generations, right? We have 5 families in this church who have been here since it was founded 126 years ago, continuously. And I actually think that's really cool. Like, I look at those families, and I have so much admiration for them, like, just because of who they are today, but I see the fruit of years of faithfulness. They're here. Their kids are here. Their businesses are here. They've amassed great wealth here. Because rather than uprooting over and over and over again, they planted themselves, they put down roots so they could grow and bear much fruit on every level. And it's so easy to look on the surface of like, well, if I just jump over here and I can do this and do these things, and I'm not saying don't. I just think it's easy to miss the incredible blessing that comes from years of stalwart faithfulness and being rooted and unified at the cross of Jesus. I know some of you are like, well, it must be nice. I wish I was part of a 126-year legacy family like that. I missed it. Listen, the best time to put down roots is many years ago. I get it. Producing fruit in life from being faithful can take many years of just being faithful. And many of us here, though, you know why we love it here is because we're harvesting their fruit. right? We're sitting in their sacrifice. We're sitting under the canopy of their generosity and their service and their leadership and their pioneering and their relentlessness, because we're not producing much yet. And that's okay for a season, but I believe that God is calling us to a new season as a church. The second best time to put down roots is today. And I want to challenge you to put down roots and say, this is my church. And I'm not leaving because things aren't perfect. I'm not leaving because life is busy. I'm not skipping because so-and-so is not preaching. I'm putting down roots. I'm showing up in person. I'm investing financially. I'm praying for this place. I'm investing with my time on volunteer teams. I'm investing relationally. I'm sick of this mentality that says, I'm packing up my toys because I'm not getting along with somebody and I'm going somewhere else. If that's your mentality, I bet there's a lot of you who saw this picture and you think, man, that's my life. That's me. I might be 40 years old, but I look like that. If your life is like my apple trees, uprooted, not growing, and not connected, I want to challenge you to consider getting connected. I want you to really evaluate the cost of uprooting yourself each time. Young people in the room, I want you to really consider the legacy that you're leaving, the friends that you're making, the decisions that you're making. I want you to think about the cost of uprooting yourself. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I want you to consider what it means to be rooted and unified in Jesus Christ. I want you to consider what it would take to be relentless, to push through the pain until you reach a place of health in your life. For some of us, we've been essentially gypsies our whole life. We've been moving around. We've never been placed. It's time for us to say, you know what? I'm putting down roots. I'm working through wounds, and I'm growing to a place of health. I used to do blanks, but I've kind of switched this over to this new thing where I give you guys questions on your notes. And on your note sheet, I put down 4 questions. I want you to ask with people you love or journal with yourself, but really sit down and ask, is my life rooted in something? If so, what? I bet there's a lot of us who, if we really look at our life, we're not rooted in anything. We're not rooted at work. We're not rooted in our marriages. We're just like business partners and roommates. We're not like rooted in church. We just go to church. We're not planted here. We're not rooted anywhere. We're not rooted with friends. It's just everything is convenience. It's just a season of life. If that's a reality of your life, I want you to acknowledge it. Next question. Am I growing spiritually, relationally, and emotionally? Why or why not? If we're not rooted, I bet there's a lot of us who, if we're honest, we've just been living the same year on repeat. We're not more emotionally mature, spiritually mature than we were 10 years ago. And I don't want you to watch your whole life pass you by, missing out on the opportunity of getting rooted and enjoying the blessing that God has for us. Number 3, are we producing fruit? Why or why not? I think it's a big question to ask. And finally, how can we put down roots or grow deeper roots in the soil of our lives? Simple applications: put down roots by taking a next step class, become an owner here, make profession, get baptized. And we're not perfect, but this is a great place to grow. If you've already filled out a next step card and then you chickened out when Elise called you, fill out another one, and this time take her call. I get she's intimidating. She's like 6'2", but when she slouches, she's only like 5'11", and she's super sweet, super nice. But listen, just say, it's my time. It's our time. We're going to grow deeper roots. We're going to get involved. When you feel hungry, when you feel unfed, when you feel unhappy, when you feel lonely, instead of uprooting yourself, commit to pushing through it and growing stronger. For so many of us this year, I think this word relentless is so important because we're at a new season and a new era as a church. You know what? 5 years ago or 4 years ago, 91 families gave $6 million so we could build this building. And you know what? We're sitting in their blessing. We're harvesting their fruit. We're sitting under the canopy of their blessing. But I believe that today, this time, God is calling us to a new effort and a new work that's going to require many of us together to say, we're fruitful. We want families to sit under the canopy of our faith, our stalwart battle to grow, our decision to put down roots. We want to leave an intergenerational legacy that will be here long after we're gone. And that requires us to put down roots and say, me and my family, we're here, we're growing, we're doing this together with this orchard. Having stronger roots makes life a joy. Instead of getting fed, instead of needing things from others, instead of needing to pour out our life and have people comfort us and counsel us all the time, instead of needing people to help us process our problems, you become a rich orchard full of fruit to fill others around you. And that is a good place to be in life. I think about the people in my life that I admire, our elders, our deacons, our staff. One of the big ones for me is my wife. I have so much. I've watched her go from that little stubby apple tree I showed you into this beautiful, rich, fruitful tree. 10 years ago, when we first got married, my wife was struggling so hard, depression, anxiety, suicidal, all these different issues. Sexual orientation, so many different things that she shared with our church. And for 5 years, she was relentless. She put down roots, and it was horrible, and it was hard, and it was difficult. And she fought through it. She said, I'm not quitting. And I know she talks about, there were days she was like, I wanted to run away from my family. I want to run away from my kids, my marriage, the calling that, being married to John meant with the church. I wanted to run away from all of it. She said, I'm relentless and I'm putting down roots. And today, I think she is the most fruitful person that I know in my life. I just think God is calling some of you guys to be relentless. I see people who are examples of what deep roots look like. I see a generation that knows God's love, that has God's power, because they put down deep roots into it. As we close, I want to ask you guys to stand. And I just want to pray for our church. I'm not going to end hooting and hollering. I already did that last week. But I want to challenge us to walk into this new season with faith and expectation. I want us to experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully, so that we can be made complete with all the fullness of life and all the power that comes from God. Psalm 92 says, but the godly will flourish like a palm tree and grow strong like the cedars of Lebanon. For they are transplanted, planted, and rooted to the Lord's own house. They will flourish in the courts of our God. Let me pray for you, church. Jesus, we lift your name up this morning. I pray for each person in this room today. I pray that you would give us deep roots, relentless courage, and a deep vision for what you want to do with our life. I pray that you would make us a place where thousands of people far from God can be filled with life in Christ because of the fruit you produce in us, because we put down roots. I pray that we could grow together and do life together. In the name of Jesus, all God's people said, amen and amen. Let's sing this last song together.